I'd like to record this in honor of Rav David Shochet for his recovery. So, this one is going to be a reflection on the racism I encountered since Dr. Peterson. It was definitely something left out. The goal is still to purify that right side because both the left and the right hand paths are important. They're things of value. They both have truths in it, and people can't stop fighting about it. And sometimes, you know what? Sometimes I see the benefit. Sometimes I see that violence or even struggle from the side of the oppressor is necessary because they've always lived in violence. And so here's to reflection and here's to facilitating change. There is a story told by a great rabbi. He came up with this amazing idea after years of learning. And one day he goes on a walk and he encounters a shoemaker and his son. And he hears the shoemaker saying that same idea with his son while they're learning the Talmud. And he was aghast and he was surprised. And he went back looking for answers. And the answer was, well, look, you came to that idea. You came to that idea and you brought it in closer proximity to people on earth, and therefore other people now have easier access to it. This idea I first heard back when I was in the undergrad at U of T from a physics student, and she was telling me about how when you have a group of people in a room solving a problem, if one of them solves it first, other people have a faster time in solving theirs as well. And I hear this idea again in the Torah, in many places. And I see in my life, and I'm sure you can see it in yours too, that when you bring down an idea, other people have easier access to it. And unfortunately, some of those ideas were not complete. They were definitely not complete. And so this time, it's to focus on the racism bit with Peterson. I'm grateful for the viewers who spent the time to listen. It's certainly, well, I'm grateful for it. I don't want to need it, and I don't need it. Things like this will have an effect regardless of whether there is an audience or not. But to go back to 2012 to 2016, I was just turning my life around as an undergrad student. I was quitting a bunch of addictions that accumulated, that worsened after going into university, joining a fraternity, and now I was purging myself of all these hedonistic drives. And I stumbled across Jordan Peterson at U of T, and I took one of his classes. I strove very hard to come to myself, and I took one of his classes. My parents wanted me to be medical students, but that just didn't turn out to be. It wasn't me. It wasn't authentic to who I am. So eventually I retook Psychology 101 and got the grade I needed to go into a psychology specialist. And yeah, and then I took one of his courses. I took one of Jordan Peterson's courses, his Personality 230, Psych 230. And I was one of those students who would ask him questions after class. I do it with all my teachers, but he seemed to care. He seemed to like my questions about Nietzsche, and eventually he asked me to work for him, to whether I'd like to take on a project with him. And that, I remember, evoked envy from one of my fellow classmates who told me that I didn't deserve such a thing. I think she was also Jewish. but that will come into relevance later. I mean, that perhaps part of the faux Jewish identity, which is to be an intellectual and to be more of an intellectual than the secular society. And I certainly have that. I certainly have that. This is a assimilationist type of personality. But trying to keep focused here. I feel like back then I was exactly like this internet celebrity, whatever you want to call him. His name is Charlie Chung, this UCLA student who went on YouTube, talked about how whites are victimized. There's now reverse racism and whites are the oppressed. And I was that guy, I was that guy in 2012 to 2014, especially. One of the first letters I wrote to Peterson was how downtrodden boys are and how downtrodden the male gender was. And, you see it today that people talk about it. Yeah, they've picked up this kind of victim narrative. And I was so naive. I was just so naive because I didn't understand the historical context of everything that was going on back then. The protests, I went to men's rights talks and it was shut down. You can see the videos on YouTube. They were shut down by protesters, by left-wing protesters, and I was so disgusted by that at the time. I just felt they were such little shits. They're like spoiled teenagers. And in some ways, maybe they're not, I'm not completely off because a lot of those people have privilege. But at the same time, now I see that their cause is just because you have to fight this. It's not about free speech. It's about not giving room to potential fascists. Of course, there could be an opposite extreme. I felt tyrannized at the time. Tyrannized by people who are left-leaning. Tyrannized by people who want to speak for me about ideas that I had a pretty good grasp about. They didn't want me to talk about gender. They didn't want me to talk about sex differences. But at the same time, those are probably issues of race. Those were issues of privilege. Because as an Asian person, we don't feel as privileged to talk about ideas with such confidence, and we would second guess ourselves much more. I mean, the culture has us second guessing ourselves all the time. There are very, very few Asian people who are outspoken. I think part of it is ingrained racism. We feel like we're inadequate. I mean, gosh, we had 200 years of humiliation from the West. It's not about playing the victim, but we certainly have to remember how horrible things were. That the Chinese were colonized by 8 different allied colonial settler states from Europe. They all had property outside of Europe, and China was next. And it was either their way or the highway. And thank God, China was only partially colonized. Partially colonized. We had ports that were colonized. But thank God the central government didn't completely kowtow to foreign rule. And things were already pretty darn bad after that. And we have a lot to recover from. So much to recover from. But that's a digression. Yes, we didn't understand anything. I didn't understand anything. A lot of these people, sure, sometimes it's not about arguing with narcissistic oppressors. Sometimes it is about expelling them from this space. And I don't like it. I don't like it when whites, whatever their other oppressed category is, issue commands and display their privilege and dominate. I feel like this is a distinctly European phenomenon. Europe is, or was, and still is, characterized by 90% of its history being embroiled in some kind of warfare. This is not seen anywhere else. This is European exceptionalism. And it's inherited from the Roman Empire, which has to do with expansionism, with conquering barbarians. And later, the Christian religion was exapted. The Jew Jesus was taken as part of that myth, that European myth of conqueror, savior. It became completely twisted. It was the wrong frame. And I certainly attempted that frame. I took it to the umpteenth degree under Peterson and then beyond. But that's a story for another day. The thing to focus on is that we were ignorant. We were ignorant of everything that was going on. I don't think Peterson knew. I think Peterson was just one of those few people who fell through the cracks. But then why give him the benefit of the doubt? Because it's pretty well known that white people behind closed doors are pretty darn racist. From my friends, from the anecdotes that I've accumulated over the years, these are things that are beyond me. And he certainly revealed his very deceptive side in current times, in recent years, when I tried to encounter him again. But yeah, I think this will be enough for now. I had a plan to speak about something different, but the mind doesn't really always follow the plan of the conscious brain. The process of purification still has to continue. There's something to be resuscitated from all that. If there's something to resuscitate from that, it's this idea. The idea that I heard when I was walking the halls of the Hasidic synagogue of Chabad in Toronto. And it's the idea that currently there is a war going on within Esav, who was the brother of Jacob, reincarnated into Jesus, and dominated the world through the Roman Empire in its current form. There is a war going on right now within him, and it's a war between the good and the bad. And from a more informed historical perspective I'm looking at now, the good seems to be on the left side. But of course, that could change. The good is whichever side that allows people to be authentic to themselves, to follow the natural patterns of life. And I understand the importance of culture, and that's a big part of following your own instincts. There's no conflict. Following the laws of the land is a big part of it. Challenging it sometimes may also be part of it. But Rogerian psychology, Rogerian counseling has always advocated, and this is evidence-based research, for people to be authentic, to be genuine. And I hope, I pray that God will allow us to be our authentic, true selves, and that He'll help us to stop this bloodshed, because I believe with authenticity, and that involves conscious reflection on the side of people with power, and myself included, because I'm a male, and I have power over female, and I'm heterosexual, and there's privilege, unearned privilege, passive default privilege that comes with me wherever I go, vis-a-vis people who are trans and who are homosexual. These are things to reflect on, because with power comes the potential for harm, for destruction. May God save us. So please, God, help us. Help us to fulfill all the things that we learned.